One thing that strikes me based on reading the emails we get, the comments on the video, the comments on Instagram, comments from whatever, is how compelling this topic of narcissism is. And a lot of people almost being quite angry of why the hell don't we know more about this? Why isn't this being taught in high school? Why don't more employers know about this? Why didn't my HR department know about this? Why? So it's a great question. I went through what I considered an extraordinary graduate program. We didn't talk about it. It wasn't part of a class. We didn't do that much reading on it. It wasn't part of the supervision. It just wasn't part of it. If it came up by coincidence on the case you'd been assigned, you would have learned about it. We don't talk about it. There was recently a case, and I'm going to leave the names out of it. There was recently a case of a woman who is a mental health practitioner who had spoken to some of these patterns in some people who were public figures, and the person actually ended up losing their job. They were simply pointing out things that were kind of true. But this word, because you got to remember this word narcissism, when you talk about this isn't like talking about depression. This isn't like talking about anxiety. This is often putting a name to the pattern manifested by some of the most difficult and frankly some of the most dangerous people in the world. And since difficult and dangerous people are really, really good at threatening, we often don't have reliable sources of information. And the reason I got into this work is actually with sheer anger. And the anger was the day I looked up and said, holy crap, we know something. And if people know this something, they may make different decisions in their life. But when the system is set up in a way that people out there who know are being told you can't share this. We don't want people walking around diagnosing people as narcissistic. And as I've told all of you a million times, calling someone narcissistic is not diagnostic. It's the equivalent of calling them an asshole, but using language that can be used at the dinner table. It really is that. It's descriptive. It's like calling someone stubborn or friendly or nice or mean. It's a term. My version of kind may not even be your version of kind. What I'm trying to do, though, is make sure that people are using this word right, not just to be the preening narcissist staring in the mirror, but this really much more toxic, manipulative pattern. But because people literally lose their jobs for talking about narcissism in certain ways in public spaces, this person actually was naming names, it becomes a tricky topic to talk about. And what it then means is that nobody talks about it. And the fact is that when nobody talks about it, then nobody understands it. And when nobody understands it, these cycles repeat over and over again, not to mention that many, many, many millions of people out there are walking around in a chronic state of self-blame because they don't know. I can tell you that it wasn't until deep into my career that I started getting this. I had lived through it. I had been exposed to it in every phase of my life. After studying it as a fully cooked professional, I was like, oh my God, this is something that the world needs to hear. But it was a hard thing to get out there for the longest time. And any time I would say, shouldn't we be teaching people about this? Oh, I don't know. Seems kind of mean-spirited. Well, everyone's got a backstory. I'm the first one to sit here and tell you, many people who have narcissistic patterns in their behavior do have difficult backstories. I have no dispute with that. Many of you watching this channel know that I've worked clinically with many narcissistic clients. It's been some of the hardest but most devoted clinical work I've ever done. And the fact is, while I do the work with them, we just don't make that much progress. It's the rigidity, it's the nature of the pattern. So I know this, but this idea, and I also know that the backstories are difficult and it limits them. But the fact is, if somebody was to punch me in the face and say, well, the reason I punch you in the face is all this stuff that happened in my history, my nose is still going to be bleeding and it's still going to hurt. If we if we silence the people out there, the good people out there who are doing this education about important but difficult to talk about mental health patterns like narcissism and write them off as sort of negative Nellies or that's not very nice. We are leaving people without information that we've got. And because the people out there, when they get called out as narcissistic, well, they don't like that, right? The shame activation for them. The attempt becomes to shut down the ability to talk about this. A lot of people feel like even once they read about narcissism and say, whoa, I want to tell my siblings about this, this might help them understand what happened in our family of origin. They'll find there's resistance from their siblings. They'll find resistance in their workplaces. I have to say that when I have stepped into places I work in and say, I'm a little bit worried about this person because I'm kind of sensing, and I use, you know me, high conflict, antagonistic, vulnerable, entitled. I use all kinds of words so I could put lipstick on the pig, so I don't sound like everything is narcissism. There's still some pushback. So when I read this recent story of somebody being removed from a position for calling out other powerful people for being very antagonistic and frankly narcissistic, it gave me pause. And it showed me that the people who are in positions of power don't necessarily want the world to know about this. And that's why I think it's so important that everybody knows about this. I frequently get requests for people, can you talk about this famous person or that famous person or this famous person? Don't you think they're narcissistic? I ain't touching that. No way, no how. Because as soon as we connect it to a name, like you already know the answer, all of you who've ever sent me one of those emails saying, can you comment on this famous person? If you're sending me the email, you know you're right. But it's for those reasons, because this bigger message is so much more important. I want you to understand the dynamics of it. I don't care if some foolish, random, famous person is like this. What I care more about is that in all of our ordinary lives, in our ordinary homes, and in our extraordinary hearts and minds, that we are allowing ourselves to get full of self-doubt and hold ourselves back. You need this information so you can make sense of what's going on around you. It doesn't mean you even have to call them out. Doesn't mean that you have to get them evaluated. I'm teaching you that these patterns, name them however the hell you want, but these patterns are not good for you. And you hanging out just to have someone manipulate and gaslight and invalidate you in the name of some larger social structure of, well, everyone has a backstory. I ain't hanging with that anymore. I'm watching too many good people lose their voice. So that's just my rant for today. When I saw that happen to that person, I was like, oh my, you know, wow, the powerful people do not want people talking about narcissism. So I'll continue talking about it in my own careful ways, and it's why I don't take on some topics. I don't need the headache. Because I don't want to silence the ability to bring this information in a way that actually helps people's lives. Because frankly, those powerful people are very little interest to me. What's of interest to me is that they've created a world that's full of enabling, rewarding, and incentivizing narcissism, and that's trickling down to all of our regular lives. So that's what this is about. And again, this is why nobody knows anything about it. Because as a system, as a mental health system, this area of narcissism is the one thing that a lot of people don't want to talk about and how it affects people's lives. I don't know why this whole idea of like everyone has to be living and playing in a happy sandbox where everyone shares the toys. It's not the world we live in. And so that's my rant. Thanks.